Okay, so we're moving on apace to our closing keynote. And I want to begin by saying a few personal things about Dr. Sarah Sutler-Cohen. As some of you might know, and if you might have picked up from my comments during this conference, I, in a way, stumbled into metal studies. Really, it happened, I was sitting on my couch one day, flicking through the TV, and Global Metal came on, and it just captivated me, the documentary, looking at how metal had become global in all different places. I also grew up in Israel at a time when there was no metal scene there, so particularly seeing the depiction of the metal scene that pretty much had sprung up the moment I left was really interesting. And as a scholar, I teach religious studies. I said, wow, there's a really interesting angle here on religion and how metal in different places engages with different religions differently. And I had this idea to start working on it. And at the time, I had no idea that there were people in the world who did metal scholarship as their scholarship, who had written articles, who had it on their CDs, who were teaching it, and one of the scholars that I was told about was Dr. Sutler-Cohen. She had been at UVic earlier in 2007?
Eight.
She was the Lansdowne speaker at UVic from Women's Studies and had given a talk on women in punk and hardcore. And it was
Not
very, what?
Metal, not hardcore.
Oh, punk and metal, sorry. And it was very, I'm ad-libbing here.
That's what we all do.
And it was so well received that when I started talking to people about doing something on metal, a number of people said, you need to contact Sarah. She's a great speaker. She's really has done scholarship on it, and we need to be in touch with her. And that's how our connection began. I ended up not receiving the funding that I needed to bring a bunch of people who I wanted to bring for that, and Sarah was one of the people who couldn't make it that time. So I'm really happy that we could swing it this time.
Me too.
And again, I just want to mention that one of the people who talked about Sarah Sutler-Cohen's talk was a former student here at UVic, and and Sarah's talk really inspired her to change her focus, and she's now doing a PhD on hip hop in Native American and Indigenous cultures. And it all kind of started, as she's told both of us, that it started a lot from that talk. So, okay, so you've got to change careers today. No. But I'm just saying, so a little bit. So Dr. Sutler-Cohen has a PhD in sociology, and she's teaching in the American Indian Studies Department at the College of Ethnic Studies in San Francisco State. She received her PhD in sociology with a parenthetical notation in American Studies in 2005 from the University of California, Santa Cruz, where she completed her dissertation on the phenomenon of neo-shamanism in the Northern California area. Dr. Sutler-Cohen has been teaching courses in popular culture, media studies, and religion, as well as a breadth of sociology courses for 15 years. She has worked in educational administration as a department chair and division dean. She was programming director for the American Indian Film Festival at Bellevue College up in the Seattle area for 5 years before returning to the Bay Area in the summer of 2012. Her current research has returned her to two topics close to her heart: death, dying, and bereavement, and heavy metal and socioeconomic class. Sarah is in the research and writing stages for a project that looks at the intersection of cultural capital and socioeconomic realities of recurring heavy metal bands. And if you are in a heavy metal band, her survey is still ongoing?
Yeah, I'm going to talk about it, yeah.
Okay, so, and again, I just want to underscore that part of encountering Sarah and having her advice and help and guidance really encouraged me to put things like this together. She really, early on, was one of the people that sort of talked to me about the heavy metal community ethos of do it yourself and also making it work. And when my budget for the last conference fell apart, she kind of helped pick up the pieces, even though she couldn't be present, and sort of said, you could still do something. Don't give up on it. And we made something, and from that, this happened, and hopefully it'll keep growing. So thank you, Sarah. Personally.
Oh, wow. Thanks. Unexpected cry part, thank you. Wow, thanks, Shama. And I wanted to thank you and Miles for giving me a ride from the airport, and Alicia for propelling the Women and Images thing, and I really think you should do a paper on that. And then Casey and Ian and the English department for helping me get here. And Shama, thank you so much. That was, thank you very much. I don't know what else to say. Thanks, man. So I'm going to come back to this later, but if you haven't heard of this band, Lesbian, they're from Seattle. They're very good. You can hear them a little bit in the background. They are friends of mine. I sort of stumbled upon them. A friend of mine had a online metal magazine that's now defunct, and she knew I used to do journalism, so she called me. She's like, I want you to cover Seattle music. I'm like, I don't even like Seattle music. I'm from the Bay Area. And she's like, what about punk rock? There's no punk rock in Seattle. No, I'm just being a jerk. And then I went to a place called the Comet Tavern, which is now gone in Seattle, and I saw this band. A couple of friends of mine had encouraged me, just go see this band. I'm all, Lesbian, dude. What is it? Come on, whatever. So I go, and I'm just, face melting. And I introduced myself to them. I got to know them. I interviewed them, wrote a story, and just stayed friends with them. They're very, very nice people. They became good friends. The bass player, who this guy right here, Durando Pete Hodis, ended up teaching my son, being his bass teacher. So I'm going to talk about that because that's part of the story. But this is sort of speaking to the kind of DIY ethos of metal and hip hop and punk rock and like a lot, even like Hank 3 and other sort of outlaw country. All of these kind of underground musical expressions do really embrace the DIY ethic or ethos, and this is one way to do it on Bandcamp, right? Or to sell your material for $7, you can get a digital download, and some of them are even just whatever you can afford. You can have it for free, but you take your spare change too. So if you can't afford it, and so this is one kind of interesting aspect. So I'm going to just stop here and I'll just let you stare at that while I do my talk. I'm going to jump around. I have a couple other websites. But anyway, so thank you very much. My talk today, I'm going to give you a little bit of a story, kind of honoring what Rhonda talked about yesterday around honoring story. It's one of the ways in which we have cohesion in the metal community and recognition in the metal community is our stories and how we came to be here. And all the presenters, and I'm going to do it too, it's sort of like, well, let me give you my permission slip that I am allowed in the room and give you my story, which brands me a proper metalhead. I get to be here. I'm not just an academic kind of, on the outskirts looking at all these interesting people in the room. Like, I'm a real deal, right? And I have to prove that to you. And that's part of the narrative around metal studies. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a story, some reflections on metal studies as a field of intellectual curiosity, and a snapshot of my own research. I've never been a keynote speaker, and I've looked it up, and a lot of it spoke to being inspiring. So I had a knock list of advice I was going to dole out, and I got rid of it. So the topics, I was looking at the call for papers for this conference, and the topics really speak to the inherent intellectual and cultural value in this burgeoning field. So you can sort of see this. This is the Modern Heavy Metal Conference. It's happening in 2015 in Helsinki. I have gotten my abstract approved. And hopefully we'll be going. You have to actually write the entire paper, and Keith Con-Harris and I were joking about it, and we're going to say some smart-ass comment if and when we get there about expecting an entire paper to be written before you go to the conference. But that's the hope. So hopefully I'll be going. This is happening. I couldn't find the current site for this, but this is at Bowling Green State, and this is actually happening this weekend. And Lena Dawes is there, and a few other people. But the Heavy Metal Popular Culture Conference at Bowling Green State University. This is happening right now. So Dr. Keith Conn-Harris and Shama and myself, three of us are co-editors for this Jews and Metal collection. And was it your idea to call it? Yeah, Black Shabbos.
Oh, the name was
Was that your idea?
No, that was
It was Keith's idea? This is how awesome is that? Okay. I mean, being a Jew by proxy, it's just my dad, and there's a whole narrative about that. I'm not really Jewish. I'm like borderline nihilist atheist. So, proper black metal fan. Anyway, I love it. So I'm going to be part of that, which is really cool. Then there's this that just came out, Metal Music Studies. The first volume is out now, and I think that they're taking calls for papers for the second. There is the Black Metal Theory Symposium that some of you might have heard of. Daniel and I were talking about the paper on Wolves in the Throne Room, and it's a little silly, but some of it's interesting. This is a very recent thesis done by Sarah Kitteringham. She is in Calgary. I was one of her editors for this thesis. It's very good. You can get this on academia.edu, and if any of you are interested in any of this stuff that I'm talking about, just I have my card and you can bug me. There's lesbian. That's my thing, and I'll talk about it later. And then this is Noctis. And there were 7 of them, 6.5 of these. They were happening in Calgary, and 2-3 years ago, I was on Facebook, and I'm flipping through Facebook, and it comes up in mine. I'm like, I hate Facebook. And then it pops up in my newsfeed. I love Facebook. And I'm like, Noctis Heavy Metal Conference. What in the, what is this amazing thing? And so I go on there, and it's like Venom is headlining, and all these amazing bands played. I think the one I went to, which was the 5th one, Venom headlined, and Pig Destroyer was playing, and Speed Wolf, and oh my gosh, Pig Destroyer just full for them. I love that. And so I got all excited, and I went, and I met the organizer, Therese Fleming. She has become a mentor and friend, and then several other people that were involved. So I met Sarah, became friends with her, Monica Deviat, who's a Deviant Optics Photography, an amazing concert photographer. And then I was invited to come back and be part of it. So this is the coolest part about all of you sticking to doing metal studies, that something really awesome might happen to you, like this. Hell yeah. Look at that. And then I got this cool picture, and they teaked it out. So now it's my profile picture for everything professional. So this was just awesome, and it was the best. It was the best experience. I got to see Candlemass and Gorguts played, and Gorguts just sort of made me pass out inside. They were amazing. And I got to talk to Luc Lemay, and I'll talk a little bit about that in my presentation. So I'm not going to be a complete ego whore and leave that up. I'll leave that up instead. So the cool thing about metal studies is that it's interdisciplinary driven, right? And we've talked about this a couple times. It's based on the varied approaches to the field, which also reflects the too many to mention genres of metal today, which I think is kind of cool. So metal, we could call metal an interdisciplinary genre, right? The nuances, these interdisciplinary nuances, sort of reflect the breadth of metal's culture and structure, and its fan base, and its viscerally transformative properties in spiritual, political, intellectual, historical, philosophical, I threw that in. I threw that in for you yesterday. Economic, cultural, and social realms. The music itself, its artists, and the vibratory nature of sheer volume can transform the audience. Even if you've never heard it before, it does something. And as a social scientist, I have a desire to understand the human condition via this incredible transformation of spirit, especially because it happens to me. And it always, I like to say, some people go to church, I go to shows. and I remember going to a show years ago. It was Carcass, and I don't remember who else played, but it was every single band was amazing. And I kind of got goosebumps, and my flesh was crawling, and the hair on the back of my neck. And it was just this wonderful feeling. And I thought, oh, this is what people think when they think about God. right? When they think they're having like a religious experience, this must be what that is. And I'm really comfortable living in ambiguity, so I don't need to call it anything but like, oh, that felt cool. So I thought that was interesting. It also reminds me of Sam Dunn's very last comment in his documentary, A Headbanger's Journey, where he says, if you don't get it, that's okay. And, when the hair on the back of your neck stands up when the bands come out. And this is a wonderful feeling, but I really always wanted to kind of get more involved in that. And I'll talk about that as an academic, too, and how I ended up where I did. So 3 of the words that the call for papers used was wild, grotesque, and forbidden, which I love that that's a part of the description of metal as metalers, but also the description of metal as outsiders, and the misunderstanding of what these mean for both parties, if you will. So for the informed, for the metalhead, we understand this joy in darkness. We sort of get it. The trick as a metalhead and as a scholar is to at once embrace that and then circumnavigate the ivory tower, right? Considering the collective experience of cultural and social contracts in the metal community, and understanding that sort of sense of agency in terms of taste and desire of the grotesque, and really understand what that means. And it really is kind of like living in 2 worlds, as an academic and as a metalhead. Like, how do you do both, right? I mean, you put on a cardigan for your conference, and then you put on a black metal shirt for this. And I struggled, and I'm like, I'll just wear what I go to work in. When I start teaching, a lot of times I have to tell students, okay, just ask now. Look now, ask now, and then we're done talking about it because my tattoos don't matter. We're going to talk about class, And so I always get the questions, who heard, and all this, and look what I got. And I'm like, okay, we're done now, right? You're over it? Cool, let's move on. So all of this sort of begs 2 questions. 1, why does metal matter? Why does it matter? And 2, why does metal studies matter? I could tell you my personal reason. I can't live without it. And I'd be bored to death, and I'd quit my job and go be a waitress without it. So that's like my, offhand answer. I want to tell you my story about my relationship with metal music as a human being, and then with the metal community, which is my family, and how I became a scholar, and then ended up studying metal as a way to make my work matter to me. So as you heard Shama introduce me, I didn't really do any kind of metal studies. And can I tell you how jealous I am of your heavy metal student club? I want a patch, by the way. I like your patch case. I want one. And then I'll tell you a little bit about the work I do, and we'll have time for questions at the end, hopefully. So I'm a cultural sociologist, which is a fancy way of saying that I cheat on sociology and I am an interdisciplinarian. It's driven by stories, again, just kind of bringing up what Rhonda talked about yesterday, and driven by stories of human condition. This project starts, sort of both the project of me as a metalhead scholar and the project of what I'm doing now for a living, or not a living, but what I'm doing now professionally. It actually starts in utero for me. So my father is a musician. My dad was in a band called Country Joe and the Fish. I'm sure all your parents have heard of them. They were also dubbed the band that stopped the war. Started the war. No more coffee for Sarah.
That was your dad.
Yep.
She's big.
Yeah, it's a big deal.
So if you are familiar with, no, he doesn't need any more attention. So, it's about me. So, my father is 72. He continues to tour. He was actually just touring a little mini tour in Northern California. He's played with all different kinds of people. His name is David Bennett Cohen, and he was, if you know the album where they're all dressed up, he's the wizard. That's my dad. So, but I grew up as a child of a rock star, right? And it was a very interesting time for me, and it was not a good environment for a child at all. It was not good. I love my dad to the earth and back, which isn't very far. So I'm kidding. I really love my dad. We're actually pretty close. We've worked through a lot. But the environment that I was in was not healthy. And I'll just come out and say, start with Judas Priest. And Judas Priest has been my touchstone since I was about 11, 12, and I'm taking my kid to Judas Priest next week when I get back, so full circle. Pretty awesome. $90. And you know who's opening them? Speaking of Dokken? Steel Panther. So I'll just say that. So they have how far has Judas Priest come since Heavy Metal Parking Lot? Okay. So as a kid, it's a cliche, but heavy metal saved my life. Absolutely saved my life. Literally saved my life. It's a cliche, right? But it's true. I was a really troubled child. I was in and out of the system between the ages of 13 and 17. It was rough. And those troubles continued to follow me into my adult years, even when I became a parent. Maybe especially because I became a parent pretty young. I was 24 when I had my child. I was now 20. Because of my life choices, I had very few options. I dropped out of school at 15, but that was only the official number, right? I pretty much stopped going to school when I was 12. I was like, I went to school to be social. I didn't really hang out in the classrooms. I went to the classes I knew I'd get A's in just for showing up. And that's how I sort of maintained. And then by the time I was 15, I was like, I'm done. And it wasn't because I couldn't handle it. I just was not into school. But I knew, this weird, even though I didn't even know what a PhD was, can I tell you, I would say I'm confessing, but I'm confessing to the camera now, the world. I actually didn't know what PhD meant until I was in grad school. And I finally, I had to whisper, ask somebody what it was. I knew I wanted one. Doctor of Philosophy. Okay, cool. But I was not groomed for scholarship. I was a smart kid. I read like crazy. I wrote a lot. I had some stuff published when I was young. I knew I had a pull toward it. I went through the motions of school, but it was totally social, like I said. And I really clung to metal in those years. And my father had this desk, and it was about this big. It was kind of a DIY little funky door, and with a sawhorse underneath, And underneath the table desk thing was my record player and my records and my journal and my typewriter. And I'd hang out under this thing for hours and hours and hours, just listening to music. I probably listened to way too much Syd Barrett for my own good, but I also listened to Scorpions, and I listened to Black Sabbath, and I listened to AC/DC, and I listened to Judas Priest, without whom I don't even know what my life would have been like without Priest. Still to this day. I also listen to Pat Benatar. Totally not ashamed of that. But I began there for hours writing stories and listening to records. Later, a few years later, sort of thrash metal hits, right? In 82, 3, 4, 5, etc. And that's where I cut my teeth in the punk and metal scene in the early to mid 80s. And growing up in that area was a petri dish for thrash metal. I grew up with the bands. I still know a lot of the same people that I've grown up with. A lot of my friends in the Bay Area are people that I've known for 20 and 30 years. I thought, one of the things about Heavy Metal Parking Lot, I wrote here, I just want to say that I can't tell you how much I appreciate that there was no social media when I was a teenager and in my 20s. Because it was Heavy Metal Parking Lot. Make no bones about that. We were stupid and drunk. It was fun. Some of us did well, but it was funny. But one of the things I think was interesting about that I thought about was that we didn't have these, nobody was there to document our intellectual lapses in judgment. It was pretty cool. So just because you can't see it now doesn't mean it didn't exist, right? Anyway, so as I was growing up with my friends and family, I witnessed a lot of struggles of people being in bands, and then also about my experience as a child of someone who was touring or in a band, and kind of had it just wasn't a good place for a child. But then also as a fan of metal and watching my friends go on tour and being at the shows and seeing my friends play, I also witnessed the kinds of things that we depend on to increase our social and cultural capital as community members in a subculture like metal and punk rock. At the time, it was both. The outcomes are great. but the cost can be challenging. And the years go on, people make it work. So Stephanie Bell is the bass player for Cryosphere. There was a recent article, I want to say Metal Hammer, but I could be wrong, where they talk about her band Cryosphere. So her husband is the drummer. She sometimes will bring her kids on tour. She's good friends with the parents of her children, the fathers, and so they, when they go on tour, the kids just go. They have this like family approach to their band, and that's how they make it work. And so they get to go on tour, and sometimes your kids go if it's a short one, or they just go to their other parents' house, and they make it work. So it's really interesting. Or Ben Falgout from Goldhor and Soylent Green talked about, well, he's got the kind of job where he can actually go on tour, and then he's got this kind of, he works at a frame shop, and he can just go back to work, and he has a boss that does that. And same with Dave Ed from Neurosis, and he reflected on that on the interview with me as well, where he talked about he works at Lonely Planet Publishers in Berkeley, and he can go and just go on tour and then go back to work. But I'll talk about that. Neurosis doesn't really tour very much anymore, and they just do sort of short one-off things. My academic story is like short, sweet. I'm just going to give it to you, give it to you raw. I went to a women's college. Since I dropped out of high school, I had to go to community college, and I say I had to, but upon reflection, I think that's the way to go. And so I went to community college. I was an English major. And then I was accepted into a women's community college English major, and I was accepted into Mills College in Oakland in their English department. And I stood in line and decided that I didn't want to study English. I changed my mind and became a sociology major, like in line. It was crazy. Anyway, they let me do that. I did my undergraduate degree in sociology and then my minor in journalism. And then I went on to Humboldt State University, and I got my master's there in sociology, and that's where I started doing stuff around Native studies as well. And my master's thesis was looking at indigenous diaspora and academics and the impact of the Red Power movement in higher education. And then I went to Santa Cruz and did my doctorate there. After Santa Cruz, I got a job. I lived in Portland for a couple of years. I worked at Portland State, and I taught at Merrillhurst University. And then I got a tenure-track job at Bellevue College, which is 10 miles east of Seattle. I lived in Seattle. And I was there for 7 years. While I was there, I was chair of the department for a year. I was also a dean of the division. So I went all the way up, and then went, oh shit, I have a 9-to-5 job. This was never the intention ever in my life. In fact, the reason I went to grad school, for 3 reasons. One, what else was I going to do? Smart, and that was all I had. 2, it was very important for me to raise my child. As a single parent, I didn't want to send my kid to daycare. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to be the one to raise him. So I went to grad school so I could have the kind of schedule where I could take care of my own kid. And 3, because there's no way I'd survive a 9-to-5 existence. It just kills me. Like, I've done it before, and I'm like, I think it's a good idea at the time, and then go, oh, oops, right? And so that's where I ended up. I learned a lot. I'm really glad I did it. I also ran away screaming, and learned a lot about myself. And then I played roller derby for a little while in Seattle. I broke my leg like you wouldn't believe. Took myself out, of course. It wasn't that exciting. I just tripped. But I tripped while I was jumping on a banks track, and down I went. So I was laid up for 6 weeks, and during that 6 weeks, I had an aha moment. And I kind of was like, what am I doing? What am I doing? I like to teach. I really, really do like to teach. But I don't believe in anything else. I don't believe in any of it. I don't believe in it. And working in educational administration will make you hate academics. And that's where I got. And I just felt lost. I felt like I have no reason to be here. I don't care about this stuff. I felt like I was punching a clock, or essentially I kind of was. Well, what are the things that I really like? Well, I like heavy metal, and I like stuff about death. You know, like I'm still 15, you guys, totally. I tell my kid that all the time. I'm like, you guys, you know you're the smart one, right? He's like, yeah, I know, Mom. I'm like, okay, cool. He's a metalhead, by the way. He's good. So, very happy about that. But that was my experience as an academic, and I kind of just, and this was, I felt like that for a couple of years. Very depressed, very lost, very sort of living in a kind of liminal space of like, what do I do now? I haven't had a regular job in over 10 years. I'm stuck in academia. I don't want to do this. These people don't understand me. I'm not going to change. I kept trying really, really hard, and I just kept getting tattoos lower and lower and lower. And I'm like, what? I'm telling myself something that I can't figure out what it is. And so it's that sort of feeling of like not belonging, which, right, isn't that the narrative of heavy metal in a lot of ways, right? So like you don't belong, what do? Well, you find your people. I couldn't find my people in academia until I saw this, I knew about Dina. Dina Weinstein and I had been internet email friends for about 10 years, because when I found her book, I flipped out and I was like, oh my God, who are you? And you're a sociologist. And I'm like shaking, and it's a woman, and she's very sweet, and she's a Jew, and she's going to be in our book, so awesome. And so she was the only person I really knew about. I mean, there was a couple other books out there, but nothing that really spoke to me the way that her book did. And then, so this is a while ago. It was about 4 or 5 years ago. And then a few years ago, I learned about Noctis. And about 4 or 5 years ago, I started realizing, wow, there's stuff like on metal. And like there's more stuff than Dina's like, one off. And started finding more and more stuff. And then I started a metal studies group on Facebook, and then realized there's like way more people. And I kind of started feeling like, wow, this is great, and I can find a place here. And so metal studies, and then Noctis. And so I told you guys about that story about Noctis. And that was really what did it for me. And all of a sudden I was excited about academics again. Like, oh, I can do this, is great. And I'm just going to figure it out. I quit my job. And I moved back home. I actually still work for Bellevue, and I'm much happier there now as a part-timer. I also got a raise, which was interesting as a part-timer. That's a whole budget conversation, but that's my academic story. It kind of like I went in. I always thought I wanted to be an academic, and then I was there going, I don't belong here. What am I doing? And so metal studies, back to that question, does metal matter? Why does metal studies matter? And it's relevant. And it's relevant because, like metal saving my life, it saved my career. I just can't it's like metal, I can't quit you, right? So metal studies is relevant. And it's why for metalheads, and it's a way for metalheads to insert their passion into the world of academics. And for me, like, it really did sort of save my soul as an academic. Part of metal's cultural history is to understand your own historical trajectory, because it's your identifier. In other words, you're a metalhead and an academic, and you have to know your place in both worlds, because that's where you'll be walking. And it's great. I want to push you guys to do this, to stay focused and stay in it, because it's a burgeoning field. It's huge. I showed you all that stuff that's going on right now with it. It's popping off. And you guys are all a part of it, and you're like the next voice of scholarship in the area. It helps us understand one another, and we find our common threads in heavy metal in sort of the time frame of familiarity. So it's one thing. So Daniel was telling the story of like trying to figure out where to go after you got off the bus and you saw someone with a back patch. Like, that's, you're like that in a new town, you don't know anybody, you see a metalhead and you're like, awesome. Well, imagine how you feel in academics when there's even less of a community there than you see a metalhead in academics. And I'm like, yes. Because we are all here, and so I want to just encourage you to kind of do that. We form our identities through metal and its community, and Miles pointed that out in his presentation yesterday. So I raised a metalhead for a kid. It was a stroke of luck, and the story of my current research, which I'm going to talk about now, it picks up here. So my son is having. Dave Ed from Neurosis, I went to high school with him, and so we've been friends for a very long time. And his band, Jesus Fucking Christ, was in town in Seattle, and so we were driving them back to the airport. And so the whole time, him and Devin are like, two little heads talking. And I'm just listening, and Devin had tried a few instruments, and they weren't sticking, and Dave's like, you should try bass. And so by the time we dropped him off, my son had made the decision that he wanted to play bass guitar. We turned around, and by the time we got home, we were under negotiations for how to convince me to, what are the conditions of possibility for me to get a bass, Mom? And so I was like, well, this is how it's going to work. And so we had negotiated that by the time we got home. Which brings me to lesbian. So I had already knew these guys. I had already interviewed the band. And I just on a whim called Pete and said, you don't by any chance teach bass guitar, do you? Because he had taken a few lessons from a jazz bassist. And he was like, I don't like that guy. He actually likes jazz, but he was like, you didn't like this guy. And I was like, well, I'm like running down the list of bass players I knew, which I knew a lot more than I realized. And I had asked Dave, and so for those of you who are Neurosis fans in the room, yes? Every single one of you should be a Neurosis fan? When I asked Dave, he said, I don't have anything to teach him. I'm like, are you kidding? You're like, okay. He still says that. It's hilarious. And so I called Pete and said, just what are the chances that you could, he's like, sure, I'd love to. It's something I've wanted to do. Sweet. And so here it is. So here he is playing, teaching my kid bass every week for a few months. And at a lesson, Pete takes me aside and he says, you have to watch this movie, this documentary. It's called Why You Do This. Has anybody in the room heard of this? No? Okay. You're going to see a couple clips. So I'm like, no, never heard of it. He's like, well, you know the band Car Bomb? Yes, Car Bomb. I know about that. So Car Bomb singer Michael Daffner does this documentary called Why You Do This. I'm going to show you the beginning, and then later on I'm going to show you another clip from it. And it's all about being on tour. And because he and I had been talking about metal studies, and I want to write about it, and this and that, all this, and I'll get into that in a second, but all of this experience, kind of like my own story, and then raising a metalhead for a child, totally lucky, don't expect to have metalheads for kids just because you're a metalhead, but I got lucky. And then having the experience with Dave in my car, and influencing my kid to play bass, and then being able to go home and just call a friend who happens to play bass, and a band that I love, and him saying yes, and my kid, all of this stuff really speaks to me drawing on my own social and cultural capital and intimate involvement within the metal scene to produce an opportunity for my son. And this experience, coupled with my viewing of Why You Do This, and then tracking down the filmmaker, Michael Daffner, propelled me to take up my current project. So this is the survey. It's open, and I'll make all this stuff available to you guys. Anyway, so there's 3 surveys. There's one for fans, one for musicians, and one for industry professionals, and that's all defined and stuff here. So I started this survey about a year and a half ago, and it looks at the consequences of balancing the joy and that drives these experiences and the consequences of choosing this life in terms of socioeconomic realities, but also in terms of the cultural and social capital that tour musicians have, and they have a lot. They're rich with that. And the connections we have as fans as well to the bands and what the music means to us in terms of what we feel like when we listen to extreme music in the sometimes extreme social conditions of our personal lives. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of an overview, and we'll look at that because it's much more interesting to look at. So in his 2008 film, Why You Do This, Car Bomb singer Michael Daffner asks himself, his bandmates, and other musicians, and you'll see this bit actually in a second, why we bother to play a genre of music that virtually no one wants to listen to? Why do we take all our vacation time from our jobs to play in front of nobody and sleep in a van or a shady hotel? And then the film continues to unearth some of the hard truths about being on tour for metal bands that may surprise those of us not exposed to the gritty side of working on the road. And for some of you might expect to see this. So let's watch this clip for about 3 minutes. I'll go back to that in a little bit. My driving question for my research is what keeps bands on the road? how can we dig deeper than the often heard, well, it's the only thing I know how to do? Like, I don't buy that. Anything that ever is like a dismissive statement, I just outright don't buy it. Further, I look at the relationship between band and fan, and this might be one of the more important intersections where answers might lie in a deeper understandings of the confines of these relationships. It's important to note that all the musicians in this film, but a lot of people that I talk to, note the refusal to live a normal, quote unquote, normal life. Noted the perception of social death that a 9-to-5 job would bring, and I thought, oh, hey, I know what that means. I had to chuckle about it because I thought, wow, so academia is also like this. It's a way to avoid the time clock misery of 9-to-5 jobs. So metal and academia are totally legit coupling. So this whole idea is like meant to sustain a lifestyle, all right? A lifestyle sort of out of the margins, off the grid, if you will. And very rarely do any of these bands come back with money. So a core question might be, well, what exactly are you sustaining? If this isn't a sustainable choice, what are you sustaining? Because you keep doing it. So there has to be some sustainability aspect of it, right? A lot of economists have done theories around happiness, which is how do you get happiness? And, because, well, there's the sort of like the adage of money buys happiness. Can you buy happiness? Is it legitimate? Is it a legitimate form of joy? No, no, it's not. Because happiness isn't a human emotion like sadness, and you might experience both during the course of the day. So why would you expect to stay in one space, right? So the rough answer to the question of what are you trying to sustain here is seated squarely in the experiential and the uniqueness of being a member in the metal scene. I became very interested in lifestyle perception for members of touring metal bands. What do bands think about this lifestyle versus what do fans think about a typical set of experiences on Life of the Road? And I asked some of those questions in my survey, and the intersections of those are pretty interesting. Very, very few fans will say, chicks and drugs and whatever. Some people say it, but the context of the answers tend to be joking, right? So more than anything, I wanted my work to matter. I needed it desperately to matter. I needed to know that what I was doing was not going to bore me to death, right? Much of what we do in academics is either in the classroom or in a book to be read in the classroom. So I wanted my work to matter to the metal scene. I want it to matter to people to my people, right? Not all of them are academics. And how do I make it accessible, right? Well, I also wanted to contribute to the realm of scholarship in metal studies and in social class studies. And this is kind of where you guys come into my little, spearheading talk of trying to get you guys inspired to do this more. Because you're part of this burgeoning global community of bangers who are also scholars, which is really cool. So just imagine that for a minute. That you are headbangers and scholars. Just sit with that, because it's really, really cool. I'm looking at Miles right now. Because he's like, I'm not doing this. I'm not getting a PhD. I'm like, dude, you should all get to... So I told him I was going to start with future doctors, and he's like, yeah, whatever. I'm going to just ride you about that. So I'll give you... Anyway, so that piece of it is unprecedented. It's never happened in the history of metal or the history of academics. It's never existed before now. So just, you're a part of that. So just like one of you was talking about, oh, he's gone now. The young man who was talking about Russian music and then in 15 years, paying attention to those bands it's going to be important. Well, it's the same for what we're doing now. Because just think about Dina Weinstein's work. Without her, maybe we wouldn't be doing our work. So a snapshot of some of the results, just to throw out some statistics because they're interesting. I've got nearly 300 of them. Probably about 240 odd are good. And so I've been using snowball and convenience sampling. Average age of responses actually older than I had thought, so 34 to 42. Racially overwhelmingly white, with self-descriptions ranging from white trash to not of color. And I thought metalheads have a biting sense of humor. Overwhelmingly working class. 3/4 male, which more women than I had expected, but that could be a reflection of my own gender. 64% of the surveys that have been filled out are by fans, 23% band members, and 28% industry. And the reason that those numbers are off is that some people will fill out more than one. They could be, maybe they did band and fan, band and industry and stuff. I can count, actually, you guys. I know it's more than 100%. And the bands that have either been interviewed or filled out the survey are Birth AD, Versiferia, Corporalos Stymie, Ikilia, Impaled, Landmaid, Marathon, Ghoul, and I'm not cheating by saying Ghoul and Impaled because they're almost the same people, but not quite. Morbosidad, Kritikos, Cryosphere, From Another Time, Antiquest, My Own Chaos, Gravehill, Mad 45, Infuneration, Crash, Artros Leviathan, Jesus fucking Christ, Neurosis, also not cheating because more of them did this. Sanity's Edge, Giving the Devil His Due, Goat Whore, Soylent Green, okay, I'm cheating there. War Scythe, Hatred, and Noothgrush. Questions for band members focus on lifestyles, genres of metal people listen to and play, family life, band members, roles in their band, who handles the money, does the driving, is driving shared, booking, etc. Questions about their family life, and then more detailed questions about jobs or whether they do pay to play, getting guarantees, that sort of thing. And it looks at the benefits of cultural capital versus the socioeconomic reality. So the survey is relatively long, and then I got into interviews. And because I had about 20% of the surveys filled out by band members, I decided I was going to try and match that with my longer interviews. So far, I have, here's my little list here. The people that I have interviewed so far, and they've ranged from an hour and a half to 3 hours for each one, so it's data heavy. David from Neurosis, Jesus fucking Christ and Kicker, Ben Falgu, Goat Whore and Soylent Green, Stephanie Bell from Cryosphere, Shader Tramadon from Kayaktis, John Hopkins, he's my only industry person that I've done, and he does sound for High on Fire, COC, and Weed Eater. Chio Nukaga from Noothgrush, and then when I get home, I've got interviews with Ross Sewage and Sean McGrath from Ghoul and Impaled lined up. Well, they just told me that they just filled the survey out, so I'm excited about that. So just kind of to give you an idea of what the interview questions are, I'll share a couple of the questions and maybe give you a couple of examples of what they've looked like. So there are 14 questions. No, I lied. 17 questions. And some of them are just quick answers and some of them are longer. One of them is, can you tell me a story about your first exposure to metal? And we've all kind of talked about that, and it's turned out to be my favorite question of the survey because they're just these huge, long answers. And some of them are really surprising. 2 people have talked about how it was their older brother or sister that got them into it. And that's Ben and Chio's experience. And then Dave, of course, I know because we were in the scene together and I kind of, we grew up together in that. And so it was just, that was a very long conversation because we just started having like memory stuff, reminiscing. And then my kid walked into the kitchen and all 3 of us were talking. And I was like, we gotta get back to work. This is the first question, like the third question, and we're like an hour into it already. Okay. Another one is, what kind of work do you do when you're not touring? A lot of people, Stephanie takes her work on the road, or she uses vacation time. A lot of people take their work on the road. I mean, the internet has enabled that, where people actually have social media jobs or jobs that they can do. We used to call it, in the olden days, it was called telecommuting. And or people will have the kind of jobs where they will be rehired when they come back, no matter how often they tour, right? And a band like Goat Whore tours so much. They tour all the time. And so, I don't know how sustainable is that, because some of the band, Sammy and Sam are Sammy and Ben are the older members of the band, and the other 2 are a little bit younger. So pretty soon they're going to have to make some choices about what they're going to do. And then challenges. This was an interesting question about challenges that people have when they first ever started touring compared to now, because someone like Dave, for instance, was telling me a story about touring New York City and getting stranded, and it was a great story. And this is in the early neurosis days and before cell phones, and they didn't know anybody, and what do? And they ended up going to Times Square and asking someone, like they found skaters in Times Square, and they were like, where are the punks? And they were like, show them to go down to Tompkins Square Park, and they had to like go down to Tompkins Square Park and found someone sitting on a stoop that looked like he was a punk rocker, and they walked over to him and started talking about him, and they ended up, going to a bar and getting free drinks and then getting a show like this. And this is 1985, 6, 7, 9, maybe something like that. But it's interesting because everybody talks about social media and the advent of social media, that is a key component of a difference in terms of control, and which is why I started talking. And when I started the talk, I gave you this example of what one of the things that bands are doing to kind of take control back of their of how to like disseminate their material, right? Another question are around social or cultural rewards, and so a lot of them are like, well, going and even if you have 16 people or 6 people or 6,000 at a show or 600 or whatever, that there's an incredible benefit there. You see people you only get to see once a year or twice a year, and so there's that familiarity and the camaraderie around metal. Another question is, have you ever second-guessed your decision to tour? And everybody said yes, with a caveat. Yes, but, and then you go, and then, of course, you end up loving it, and then you hate it, and then when you get home and you hate it some more, you hate it for like 2 weeks, and you want to do it again. And that's usually how it goes. One person I interviewed said that they try to quit at every tour, and nobody will let them. Another aspect of cultural capital has to do with class and how working class people manage their sense of selves in the larger society, which continues to marginalize them. And that really matches metal as kind of a marginal genre. And so that's kind of a snapshot of the work that I'm doing. And I wanted to kind of give you my story as well, to just kind of, I'll turn this back on as I end. To give you my story, not just for legitimacy's sake, but also just to like demonstrate to you how you can stay in academia and do metal studies and do what you love, so you don't end up sinking into kind of some kind of oblivion and forgetting that you're a metalhead, right? Because I think Rob Zombie says it really well, that it's really hard to find a casual metalhead. Like nobody decided that they listen to Slayer. Nobody listens to Slayer in the summertime. You listen to Slayer, and you're just like, you're done. That's it. You're a metalhead, and it becomes a part of who you are. It becomes part of your lifestyle. And even if you stray from it, you don't get out. You just don't get out, right? And so I'm always interested in those questions. And I want to show you I know we're out of time, but I want to show you just because I pulled this up because we've had a lot of talks about global metal, and I wanted to share a documentary with you guys that just came out. It's not a show, it's a tour. And I want to end with that. And just that I'm really interested in methodology, and this is like one of the things I'm wrestling with, is to create a metal methodology, much in the model of the way that indigenous methodology has popped up. I'm really interested in that and how we think as metalheads and how we behave as metalheads and what makes it matter. And back to that question of why does metal matter and why does metal studies matter? Like, why are we bothering to do this? Especially then the majority of the audience in a metal studies panel are metalheads. So I'll leave you with that, and we have time for questions, and I'll show you this clip in a couple of minutes. But thank you very much for having me. I'll show that when we're in a second, but if anybody has any questions, I will take them.
I have a question that has come up. Other scholars have posed to me, and it's something that I've been thinking about. Sort of how do you navigate, and it goes with your final point about sort of a metal methodology, between being a fan of metal and also being a scholar of it, in terms of being able to sort of have a scholarly eye and be truthful to what you find about metal, and not sort of burying it under, well, I'm a fan, so I'm not going to go there necessarily.
Sure. I think that's a very popular question with everything. Like every ethnographer will kind of reflect on that because there's a way to problematize the insider perspective as well as the outsider perspective. So I don't know. I think that's there no matter what. You're an outsider, you have no business studying metal. You're an insider, you have no business studying metal. So I think you just have to. It's another like sort of point of negotiation where you have to figure out how to live in both worlds and be. If you just have to do good research, which means you do have to talk about the stuff you don't want to. You don't get out, right? Nobody gets out alive, right? Scott.
I wonder. Thanks a lot for talking. It's great.
Thank you.
And I wonder, in your research, if you'll find a difference for why people do it over time. It's a question whether technology and the do-it-yourself opportunities like Bandcamp will have. And it seems to me a lot of the reasons people might have done it previously were to break through, got to make it big. Right? There was a certain kind of dream that it was possible to be some huge band if you toured enough. And now it's a question, not an assertion. I wonder if it's the case that now there's more of a subgenre where people are playing for an audience they know that it's different. I mean, you always want to do well and maybe get more people to listen to your music, but I wonder if there's a change over time because of technology and the way the music's distributed now.
Well, I think that one of the biggest changes is that there's just now more bands globally than probably ever, and so the competition is different also. So that's part of the conversation, and I think another part of the conversation is distribution, self-distribution, record labels, independent record labels that have different contractual terms. People moving away from big labels, people becoming, Cascadian black metal. I mean, who's going to listen to Cascadian black metal except for Cascadian black metal bands and their girlfriends and friends? Do you know what I mean? Like, it becomes like you're playing for your friends and your community, and I think that it's an important aspect of a lot of the more extreme stuff. And most of the, I mean, except for Goat Horror and Neurosis and hopefully Corguts, most of the bands that I've interviewed are not top tier metal bands, and even with Neurosis is Neurosis, but even in Goat Horror, it's in some ways a top tier metal band, but in other ways not, because because it's still extreme metal, and if you ask me as a fan, or I am stepping outside and being a fan, I definitely think Soylent Green is a stronger band of the two that Ben is in, but Goat Horror gets, and Goat Horror is the main project. But I don't know. I think the DIY aspect and the ability to do that, I think, is really, really interesting. Especially there's I'm trying to remember the name of this band. They're from the Bay Area. It's not Fallujah. It's another band. I saw them at a show in Seattle. Devils of Loudon, Loudon, and I walked up to them. I thought they were great. I'm like, I've never heard of you guys. You're awesome. And he was like, hold on, and left. I'm like, wow, it's kind of rude. Whatever. Okay, and he leaves. I'm like, okay, and he comes back with a CD. He's like, I'll burn this for you. Here's our music. He gave me a CD. So one of the questions I asked about that I ask in the longer interview is how musicians felt about fans getting music in clandestine ways. So torrenting music and downloading, or the lesbian site that's $7, but a lot of the Bandcamp bands are whatever you can afford. We'll take what you can spare, and they really don't care. They figure they're going to get it anyway, and it's exposure, right? And Iron Maiden has a new their genius lead singer. The Renaissance man himself. So Bruce Dickinson actually came up with an idea to start touring where people are downloading their stuff for free the most, and they do really well in those places. So they just tour where people are like ripping off the music. They do great. So I don't know. I guess your question was more of a point of discussion, but it has changed the face of touring. Absolutely, in just so many ways that it's hard to even address that. Yeah. Daniel.
Oh, thanks. Thank you for your talk. It was really tremendous, and as someone who's really interested in like an academic future and
Stay.
the future of
Do
mental
it.
studies really, really inspiring.
Good.
So I appreciate that part of your talk. And so I think you met the keynote address.
Good. I had a whole list of inspiring quotes, and I was crossing them off.
My question is sort of, I have formed an idea about like these bands touring constantly, and you talked about the idea of like the social capital that allows them to tour. Partly like how do they think about home, or how would they define home, and like is the social capital that allows them to tour place-based, or like do they see this as like a rooted thing, that they have a foundation, or do they think about themselves in more like nomadic linguist terms?
I think it's really all over the place. One of the questions that I ask is, on average, how many weeks out of a year do you average? And nobody could really come up with I had to keep going, well, okay, think about the last 5 years. Yeah, but neurosis, this and that. And for someone like Dave, he's in like 6 bands. And in an interview, he's like, just say the 3 kicker, Jesus fucking Christ, and neurosis. And neurosis does like one-off shows, and they'll do MDF, or they don't really go on tour. They do short ones. And then Jesus fucking Christ tours and kicker tours, but they're very short. They're very small. And sometimes they're place-based, but in Dave's case, I think it's because he's been in neurosis. And so there's a longevity quotient, right? That's part of that I think is really meaningful versus, Che is the singer for Cactus. He's only been touring for 3 years. And so he has a different perspective on the experience touring. And Stephanie has been touring a little longer, but not for 20. And she has a different experience because she's a mother and a wife, and so their husband's in the band. So it's just like impossible. I could give you 75 different answers, but I think it's important to think about, because at the end of the day, when the single most desire is like, I hope I break even on tour, making a little money would be awesome, but just want to break even. Right? At the end of why you do this, Car Bomb does their expenses, and I think they're in the hole $7,000. I think that's right. And I got just actually have this where I kind of talk about that, where their debt is like a huge issue. Some of them make some profit on the merch, but it's a crapshoot. And for merch is interesting because they do it all themselves. And some of them, they all pay out of pocket, and a lot of times the merch will just come out of one person's pocket. I'm trying to find the stuff where I have about debt, and I can't find it. But debt is a huge concern, And
Another similarity between academics and scholars.
Yeah, exactly. Debt is a concern. Anything else? Yeah.
As a doctor of sociology, is all of the research that you do now on mental studies, or is the majority of it, or how much exactly?
So I'm writing this book. I'm also writing, I've been working on a paper on like the intersection between horror movies and Satanism and metal, and I just haven't that's what I was going to present at the conference here that I didn't get to go to, so I never wrote it because I didn't come to the conference. I wasn't on a plane on the way here, so what was I going to do? That's when you write it. And then I'm also looking at the female body in metal in terms of a presence, the physical form in the show, on the stage, and in imagery. And I'm also trying to rework my dissertation, which looks at New Age shamanism in Northern California, which is basically white people trying to be Indians. Sorry. And I'm trying to work that into a book, so I keep getting offers for publication, and I just sort of ignore it. But I'm like, this will be like a good thing. And then I'm also working on a science fiction novel right now about a dystopic future around drought, and then I am also working on looking at altruism and volunteer work with hospice. So I'm kind of all over the place. That's all like my personality is. It's just sort of all over the place.
And you get co-editing involved.
Oh yeah, that thing. But I'm not writing anything for it. I kept trying to. Shama wanted me to contribute to the Jews and metal thing, and I'm like, I'm such like a non-Jew Jew. I don't even really, I've never been to synagogue before. David Cross says that the more of an atheist Jew that you are, the actual more Jewy you are. Because the root of Judaism is is intellectual prowess and to question the existence of God. So I guess I'm like a super Jew.
That's all really cool.
Yeah, thanks.
I'm undergraduate of sociology myself.
So we'll stay in touch, and I'll bug you. So stay and do it, and do what you want to do. And sociology is like the vehicle for insanity, which is great, which is why I'm a good fit. And the opportunities now, you just don't have to stay within the confines of the dictates anymore, even though everybody else does.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I'm sorry I didn't acknowledge you before.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just wondering if any part of your research is comparing the touring experience for a metal band as compared to any other rock band or touring entertainment?
Probably. Yeah. I mean, a lot of the bands are, just to talk about Dave some more, I mean, his background is in punk rock. Neurosis was a punk band. and his other bands are all punk rock. So yeah, there's definitely some crossover there. What I'm really interested in is the more extreme versions of touring and underground music. So yeah, there's there. I mean, Hank 3 is a really interesting person to talk about because he has an amazing doom project, and he also does punk rock, and he does country. And if you've ever seen a Hank Williams III show, which I cannot recommend more to go and see, it's about a 4.5 hour long show on average, and then he goes outside for another 2 hours to hang out and talk with fans, and then gets in the bus and goes to the next place, and that's what he does. So I'm hoping to actually snag an interview with him, or at least kind of do a little bit of research, because it's an interesting, because he sits in the punk metal country, like he does all of that, and but it's an interesting conversation. But I mean, in terms of rock, I mean, I'm not really going to look at that because I'm not looking at more popular music. But I think that there's definitely there's crossover in metal and punk. I mean, there just is, and so that's going to be part of the narrative too. But I think hip hop, underground hip hop, can also be just as interesting in terms of DIY and how people tour, and it's very similar. Yeah. Janet.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that you asked now, because my question was around using the term metal and punk in the same sentence. And I was a punk then, and but I never was a metal. So to me, those things exist separately, and I understand that now. There's a lot of things that happen in a fusion kind of way, in a blurring of the lines in terms of music. And as a person who's very passionate about what's happening in the indigenous music scene, I was making a list of all the native metal bands, and to be quite honest, I'm very, very excited about what's happening. What's coming out of the native music scene in terms of metal bands. So, but I see the indigenous bands embracing the metal genre, they're really owning it and they're really indigenizing it, but I never see those same bands or anything coming out of the indigenous music scene that can be defined as punk. So what do you think about that?
There's a couple. There's the brother and sister.
Blackfire.
Yeah, right. What are they called?
Blackfire.
Blackfire, yeah. So there's that group, and then there's some punk rock there. I mean, but I grew up in the Bay Area, so to not talk about metal and punk rock in the same sentence is we can't comprehend that. That's without those things being in the same sentence, there'd be no DRI, right? Or municipal waste. No.
They're kind of really, really heavy.
No, but you're going to give me your list.
Okay, I'm going to give you mine.
Yeah, I mean, a huge aspect of my work, I'm hoping to kind of drum up, an intersectional perspective where we talk about race, class, gender, religion, and politics and naturally. And I don't ask those questions pointedly because I want it to come out naturally, and it's coming out. And also the people that I'm interviewing are broad swath in terms of race, class, and gender. So, well, not class, but race and gender.
I want to sort of broaden that comment because one of the things that we talked about last year in the wake of looking at global metal, in comparing metal and punk, is that punk's sort of worldwide reach has been a lot more limited than metal's had. In the sense, yes, there are, you could name punk bands and punk scenes in most places in the world. There's punk, but not to the same sort of extent. Like you couldn't do, I think, a movie like Global Punk the way that Global Metal would. So I'm wondering if there's something in metal that's more accessible to that kind of taking and making your own, than that punk doesn't have that flexibility.
I don't know that I agree that it's not that punk rock's not global. I think,
but not to the extent I would say that metal.
I think it's just where the camera's pointing. Honestly, it was talking to I think I was talking to you guys about the Indonesian punk scene right now. Like there's Indonesia and also like South America is really blowing up with like punk and metal, and it's both. I mean, there's some bands in Indonesia which are insane. They're so good, and I'm way too like stupid at this point for memory to work.
Yeah,
like,
but I feel
some
that's
things aren't working in here.
That fusion of metal and
But
punk,
there's
it's the fusion. It's not the pure.
And also like in Botswana,
again,
there's
it's metal.
it's
and
but
punk.
it's
not
yeah,
pure
it's a
punk.
fusion. Yeah, it's metal
it's
and
not-
punk. It is metal and punk.
That's what I'm saying.
A lot of it.
It's that sort of fusionized.
Oh, I see
metal.
what you're saying. Yeah. I think it's just a kind of a pattern, and I think it has to do with the globalization in terms of our communication and social networking, and it's just making everything accessible that wasn't at one point. And the interesting thing about the beginnings of metal in places like Malaysia and Indonesia and Botswana is that it is political, whereas it really didn't have a political beginning here. Not so much. It was in the sense that it was a response to class issues, but it wasn't, in a lot of sort of like anti-war stuff, but it wasn't necessarily, I don't think it had the political message as a band like the Dead Kennedys. It wasn't work, right? So the Dead Kennedys are sort of like, the poster child for like punk rock as an active protest, right? And even with like Jello running for mayor in San Francisco, which was like just celebrated the 20th anniversary of that happening or something like that. And so I think those are some political differences. And then you have bands like Sepultura, and you have bands like it's in there. It's like back here somewhere. More politically based metal bands, and Rage Against the Machine, which is a bit of a crossover band that are there for like a political reason. But I think globally, there's elements from metal and punk and all of these, but then they're totally political. Absolutely, especially in like Malaysia and Indonesia.
I feel that we all need a big breather. So we've got about an hour or two till the Light Takes Us screens. It's listed as 5, but literally they told me that the movie prior is only going to let out at 5:05, and we know that it'll be ready for us at 5:15. So let's take an hour. I think there's still places to get coffee and stuff, so and kind of reconvene at Cinecenta. For those of you who don't know where it is, find somebody who does.
Just follow the metalheads. That's what we do.
And then pretty much the show is the bands are in Vertigo, which is right next to City Center. So from there on, follow the music. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody. I didn't show the clip. Oh, whatever.